When Carolyn returned from Vermont, she was determined to break things off. I saw her in the office that day before the day was out. I had convinced her to reconsider. We were going to get together with her cousin that night, but then she canceled, leaving me with a night all to myself. All of the fun times were over. No one to go to happy hour with, no one to flirt with, just a desperate man all by himself. I decided to call Jackie to see if I could come visit the kids. I grabbed a six-pack and headed to the house. She was suspicious of my motives, and I could not hide my emotional state. Here I was, upset about the woman who took her husband away, and she had to listen to my sad story. I asked her if I could spend the night, and she offered me the couch. I wanted to sleep in the bedroom. We fought over it, but my persuasive behavior would overrule, and I got my way. All the time that this was going on, Jackie, in her hidden emotional style, never really showed any anger. That night she began to let me know how she felt. She began screaming and hitting me as I tried to apologize. I embraced her as the emotions began to subside, and we found ourselves in intimacy before the night was over. I woke up in the middle of the night in horrible anxiety over Carolyn and began to weep out of control. Jackie tried to comfort me, but found it hard to understand. I asked her if she would talk to Carolyn and solve this whole thing. She called her the next day and told her off. I was hoping that this would bring me back to reality, but the problem, once again, was that driving force of wanting what was not good for me. Addictions can only be broken when you no longer have an attraction to the addiction. Like a magnet attracts metals, the attraction must be diffused at first. If the power of the attraction is still present, then it is not time for the addiction to end. I was still burning inside, and the fire that would burn up this insanity was still being fueled without my ability to will it to be over. You can't just say, by my will I'll do this. You need the grace of God and the power of God. That's coming though. I don't have to bend the pages. I just got disturbed by a jerk at my own peaceful place at Our Lady of Clearwater. Everybody has their story, and they won't shut up and listen to anybody else's. Even a street person who smells a good-looking guy asked me if I was straight. After asking me about the church countryside on my t-shirt, I said, I'm out of here. Get away from me. I was so broken, I just hoped everything would get fixed. I also wanted to run away from everything, but I was now so obsessed with wanting Carolyn that staying away from her would be the last thing I could do. I had to make a decision about what I was going to do financially. Everything had dried up, and if we did not make the mortgage payment, we would lose the house. I decided to go back to Ridgefield to paint, and Jackie would follow me when school was out. This I did, but with my fingers crossed, I could not stop pursuing Carolyn. During this whole period, I had begun to dream vividly. I recorded many of them to see if there was a pattern. Was I going to get some revelation despite my misunderstanding of right and wrong? Would this twist in my journey work out for the good? I had to believe that the Lord was with me. I knew and believed that He would not leave or forsake me. I believed in visions, dreams, and supernatural occurrences. Somehow, these dreams would eventually tell me what was going on. They were loaded with intimacy. Carolyn appeared in many of my dreams, and I appeared in many of hers, apparently. This had to have been a sign, as I struggled to make this work out in my mind. This was one way I would continue to fight, hoping that God was on my side. Traditional Christianity would condemn this as sin, period, end of sentence. But I could not turn back. Emotional addiction would not let me. Now, take my servant Job. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, we often rationalize in life to justify our actions. Rationalization keeps the ego enthroned. My ego was driven to be recognized. What else did I know? I was also driven by my libido and the intrigue of sexual excitement. This created constant hunger. My marital sexual relations had never satisfied my appetite for sensuality. In fact, the routine had become robotic for both of us. I was determined not to return to a life where I just went through the motions. I had become convinced that people cannot change essential characteristics that are inherent in the nature. Even though it is possible to change behavior, I was convinced that the effort of will could not make a singer of a person who could not carry a tune. Living in a basement with 3 children and no bathroom was stressful. I worked that summer to keep the house payments up, and Jackie took care of the kids. I would call Carolyn every day on my car phone, which had not been shut off yet. Jackie did not want to return to Florida, and she did not want to deal with having to find work. She tried to see her family as much as possible, thinking it might be the last time. So reality and the inevitable would eventually catch up. That reality came in a decision for her to take a job offer in Kansas City, while I would return to Florida to sell the house. I was also hoping I would convince Carolyn to leave her husband. Really good thinking. Ugh. The day that Jackie left for Kansas City, the boys were playing in the canoe at her parents' lake. I got their attention to say goodbye, and with wonderment, Timmy looked up, asking where I possibly could be going. He had no idea, and as best as I could, I explained that I had to go to Florida while he would be going to Kansas City. It was the most difficult moment I had to confront, and the image of that moment stayed with me for years. I held the key to what he had known as a family, and playing the serenity of his innocence would be shattered by my absence. No wonder he won't speak to me at the moment. Or Josh. They're all justified. I'm the evil one. Daddy's mean. All I had to do was stop this affair and go back to his mother. Josh had asked me earlier not to divorce. He could barely pronounce the word, even though he could barely pronounce the word. It all seemed so simple in the eyes of a child. It was all up to me. No decent person, especially myself, would condone my actions. Many volunteered their condemnation, but no one pronounced my guilt more than I did. I was facing an ugly shadow. I returned to Florida. The buyers who were interested in our home were just trying to pick up a bargain. I love the tire kickers. They can tell. The vultures seem to smell blood where there is trouble, and our desperation to sell must have been in the air. The last money we had remained in what little equity was left in the house. Every bit of credit was gone. The bill collectors were sending threatening letters, and I had no job. Every fear I ever imagined had come knocking at my door while I wasted time chasing Carolyn. Maybe I should write a song. Wasting time, chasing Carolyn. She was a doll like a voodoo doll in which I would take a hairpin. My dick was the pin, and I was an idiot. Many say that a man, if he's led by his little dick, is an idiot. Well, what could I do? It was really on fire. I was told I was a stupid idiot. A donkey's ass, digging dishes. I was alone in a big house with no company. Carolyn was sneaking over to see me since she was still living with her husband, continuing to play both sides of the fence. This pulling and tugging only made my addiction get worse, convincing me that being together would solve everything. I had promised Jackie that I would consider moving to Kansas City after the house sold, but I was hoping a neon sign would light up the sky so I would not have to deal with making that decision. One day, as I awoke in a state of panic, which was now quite common, I sank into the despair of having no future. I did not get dressed, walking through the house in my underpants. I remembered my time with Bruce Morgan as he led me to express my real feelings towards God. Years ago in Ridgefield, here I was in the house my children played in, with all those memories, walking the halls in my underwear. I began to scream, "Why, God? Why, God? Has this happened to me?" I became hysterical as I walked in circles. I was happy for the first time in my life with the bookstore, and then I was forced to sell it. I prayed for years for your guidance, Father, and now I have lost everything. What kind of God are you to lead me this way? I'm sorry, so sorry. Brenda Lee. I'm sorry I've fallen, but why you let me? This is not what I wanted. I was your committed servant. I was going to the ends of the earth for you. Now I stand here on the brink of insanity, wanting to die, rather than face another moment. You did this to me. Now you get me out of this mess. Then the phone rang, and it was Carolyn. She was ready to leave her husband and wanted me to stay in Florida. She also had a friend who needed someone to work as an entertainer for her new karaoke business. Karaoke, love is coming. Crosby, Stills, and Nash. That wasn't karaoke. I would take this as a sign and temporarily function, but just barely. The house finally sold that fall of 1990, so I packed up the furniture in a U-Haul truck and headed to Kansas City. I would return to Florida in my Volvo, which I towed from behind. I arrived several days later and was greeted with excitement by the kids. I was depressed to see the apartment complex they lived in, thinking this is a far cry from the middle-class life I had wanted for them. Jackie was happy with her job and wanted to know if I would stay. I told her that I just could not handle it, and maybe I needed more time. I only stayed for 2 days. I had already gotten used to not having to be the source of the kids' entertainment, and so I did what I could and quickly made my escape. I overheard Josh say to his mother, "But you said Daddy would stay for 1 week." Oh, jeez. I forgot that. That would haunt me, as I was incapable of fulfilling his heart's desire. I never would live up to what was expected of me as a father. Why was I supposed to make promises? Why was I incapable of keeping them? Why were others able to? Why was I leaving this child's dream for the arms of a woman who didn't care? What kind of bastard was I? All their questions I asked as life drained from my soul. You are my son. Today I have become your father. I'm going to have to leave this, guys, really quick. Today I've become your father. With Josh's words playing over and over again in my head, I drove back to Florida. On my way home, I stopped at my cousin's home in Tallahassee. It was a nice visit, but in my guilty state of mind, I brought up my situation, hoping for some comfort. My cousin knew the Lord, and the Lord he knew did not approve of what I was involved in. That would be my cousin David Garvin. So he proceeded to lecture me. I tried in vain to defend my position, and in the end I could not convince him that God's approval was on my life. I left his home with a burden of guilt that took 2 days to lift. A morality lecture was the last thing I needed. When the woman at the well was caught in adultery, the law commanded her to be stoned, commanded to stone her to death. The group who found her must have been hired by her husband to spy on her, or she might have wanted to be caught. No one really knows. What we know is how the Son of God handled the confrontation. When asked his opinion on how judgment should be rendered, he simply turned to those who had no mercy and asked them if they were without sin. Since no one could answer that question in the affirmative, it's got to stop.